10. Stopping the profanity. An elderly man in Michigan was arrested after investigators found out that he had left a pair of pipe bombs at 2 different cell phone stores with the intent of blowing them to smithereens. Along with the bombs at the stores, he left threatening letters at a couple of cell phone towers. Why did he go through all the trouble to try and bomb these stores and threaten the cell tower workers? According to the man himself, named John Douglas Allen, he was angry that telecommunication companies were allowing immoral content to be distributed through cell phones. Oh yeah, and he wanted to stop everybody from using profanity on their phones. This weird crime spree began on August 25th when an unnamed employee at a telecommunications tower in Michigan found a mysterious letter inside an envelope sealed with a plastic bag. The letter said that it was from a group called the Coalition for Moral Telecommunication, but really it was just John. The letter demanded payment of $5 million to help combat the spread of immoral content. The letter also said that if any members of the organization were arrested, the price would go up 100 times. 1 month later, John was captured on camera leaving a box outside an AT&T store in Sault Ste. Marie and another one outside a Verizon store in Sheboygan. Both boxes contained pipe bombs so powerful that if either had exploded, they could have easily killed everyone inside the stores. Luckily, the cops were able to track John down and defuse the bombs, and he has since been taken into custody. He may be more than a little mentally disturbed, and happy to say, John's a little late for his mission to silence the internet. 9. Exploding face. The last thing anyone wants while chatting on their phone is for it to explode and blow their head off. In fact, most people wouldn't even consider this as a possibility. Yet, in India, an 18-year-old girl had this exact thing happen to her. Her name was Uma Aram, and her phone exploded while pressed against her ear, killing her. She had plugged the phone in to charge just before the incident occurred. And to make matters even more horrific, she was speaking to a relative at the time. The relative had no idea what happened. The line simply went dead. Somehow, speaking on the phone while it was charging caused it to blow up, which knocked Uma unconscious, burned her hand, and rattled her brain so hard that she was declared dead. You're probably wondering what kind of phone she was using, and don't worry, it's not a popular one. She was on a Nokia 5233, which was released back in 2010. A spokesperson from Nokia said that everyone at the company was saddened to hear of the unfortunate incident, but they of course denied all responsibility for what happened. And they'll probably get away with this too, seeing as the investigation was quickly wrapped up without police ever discovering what exactly caused the explosion. 8. Walks into a bear. A man in California just about walked straight into a bear because he was distracted by his cell phone. And if you don't believe me, the near-fatal incident was caught on camera by local TV station KTLA5. This individual was strolling down the street at the exact same time that a bear was strolling up the street. But he didn't see the giant animal in front of him because he was staring at his phone. He appeared to be typing a message, completely oblivious to the 300-pound, 136-kilogram bear directly in front of him. He just about walked into the animal, but looked up from his phone at the last second. We don't know for sure, but this guy probably peed his pants. It's not every day you look up from your phone and see a rampaging wild animal coming straight for you. Once reality hit him in the face, he turned around and ran. In case you're wondering where this happened, it was in La Crescenta, a place where bear visits aren't entirely uncommon. They actually come out on trash day to sift through people's garbage and steal their scraps. The bear was first spotted at 3 in the morning, with the man nearly walking into it at around 7. It was shortly after that when authorities finally caught up with the bear, tranquilized it, and took it back into the wild. 7. The cell phone from 1943. A wartime photograph taken in 1943 appears to show a man on a cell phone. Nobody can quite decide if this guy is a time traveler from the future or if he's just fiddling with his fingers. The photograph was taken at Towan Beach in Cornwall, England. While at first glance it seems perfectly ordinary, look a little harder and you'll notice there's a mysterious man in a brown jacket with his head bent and his eyes near his chest as if he's furiously typing a text message. Those around him don't even seem to know he's there, as if he's invisible to the people lounging on the beach. Naturally, people are divided on the picture. Some claim it's actual evidence of a time traveler who stopped to check out his mobile device. Others say he was simply picking his fingernails. We'll probably never know the truth, at least not until they start giving out tourist packages for traveling back in time to 1943. But forget what the experts think. What's your opinion? Is this guy a time traveler? Is he just rolling a cigarette? Or is there something even more mysterious going on? Let us know in the comments below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. 6. Charging in lightning. Radha Ferreira de Oliveira was charging her cell phone when the unimaginable happened. It was a stormy day in Brazil, and Radha had chosen to stay inside and do a bit of relaxing. Her phone was going to die, so she plugged it into the wall and sat back to do what people do on their phones. What she hadn't anticipated was that in the early hours of Sunday morning, as the storm raged on, a lightning bolt would spiral down from the sky and strike her house. That lightning bolt traveled through the house, entered the electric socket, up through the charging cord, and into Radha's body. She received a major electric shock and passed out on the spot. Unfortunately, the electric shock was so severe that the poor girl could not be saved. Her family drove her to the hospital, but she was dead even before they arrived. It was a total freak accident that nobody would ever imagine could happen to them. And yet Radha was the third person in the Brazilian state of Pará that got electrocuted during that same week. A man named Semiaho Tavares was talking on his phone when he too got struck by lightning and died, with his phone acting as a lure for the electricity to come down and shock him. 5. Fallen into a sinkhole. Yet another human being has fallen victim to staring at their cell phone. This time the victim was a young girl in China who walked straight into a sinkhole. The young woman was so committed to whatever was happening on her phone that she vanished without so much as making a scream. One minute she was walking, the next she was basically in the underworld. This disastrous fall was captured by security cameras set up near the sinkhole. The hole was caused by rainwater that seeped into the ground and caused the sidewalk to deteriorate, opening up a sinkhole 20 feet, 6 meters deep. But this girl who lived in the area was not used to there being a giant hole in the sidewalk. So as she walked and texted on the phone, she didn't anticipate there would be a sudden drop. Luckily, in this case, the girl survived. According to the LA Times, a taxi driver witnessed the whole thing, jumped out of his cab, and climbed down into the pit to rescue the poor girl. She was a little banged up, but otherwise physically fine. It was more her mental state that was going to need a bit of recovery. 4. Killed in her sleep. A 14-year-old schoolgirl named Aluza Atkizi Azalbek fell asleep listening to music in the small village where she lived in Kazakhstan. Unfortunately, the young girl never woke up. The next morning, Aluza was discovered dead with her phone beside her, the device blown to pieces. Apparently, she had plugged the phone into a power socket before falling asleep, then laid the device beside her head to listen to music. Sometime during the night, the phone overheated, blew up like a pipe bomb, and she died from severe head injuries. The only silver lining is that she never felt any pain. She never even knew she died. The blast killed her instantaneously, and so she simply stopped dreaming and, well, that was it. According to what the forensic report said, the mobile phone had exploded due to overheating in the early hours of the morning. If she had only gotten up a little earlier, she may have actually survived. Unfortunately, the exact brand of smartphone was never disclosed by the authorities. We have no idea what kind of phone it was, and so the best thing for everyone to do is just not fall asleep with your phone beside your head. If you value your life, maybe keep your phone on the nightstand when it's charging while you sleep. 3. Phone in the bath. A Russian accountant forgot the first rule of bathing while using the cell phone. You're not supposed to have the cell phone plugged in. Evgenia Shulyatyeva, just 26 years old, was discovered dead in the bath by her mother. The mother had rushed over to Evgenia's house when her daughter had abruptly stopped responding to her messages. No one knows exactly what happened in the bathtub that day, since the woman was alone. We don't know if she was texting while charging the phone or if she had her phone beside the tub while charging and it slipped in. But whatever the case, this is just the latest tragedy in an alarmingly popular trend of people dying in the bath thanks to their phones. In fact, several similar incidents have occurred in Russia over the last few years. Almost all young women in their 20s. Apparently, phones need to come with water warnings. Let this be a warning. Electricity and water don't mix. For example, a supermarket worker named Anastasia, just 20, had the same thing happen to her in April. She was found dead with the phone clutched in her hand, soaking in the tub. She was from Moscow. And then there was the poker star Lilia Novikova, who died in June from yet another electric shock in her bathroom. And finally, a more recent victim was an unnamed 10-year-old schoolgirl who dropped her phone in the bath while it was plugged in. 2. Straight off a cliff. People spending too much time and attention on their phones is nothing new, but a man in San Diego probably wishes that he had paid a bit more attention to his surroundings. This guy was staring at his phone when he literally walked right off the edge of a cliff, plummeted 60 feet, 18 meters to the ground below, and died. It happened on a Friday near Sunset Cliffs Boulevard. The lifeguards who were present at the time say they don't know exactly what the guy was doing, whether he was texting, using his camera, or simply catching up on the news. But according to witnesses, he was staring right at the screen of his phone when he tipped over the edge. He wasn't watching where he was going, and the next thing he knew, he was dead. After the fall, a handful of witnesses scrambled down the cliff to see if they could save his life. These people put their own lives in jeopardy just to try and save the guy who cared so little about his own that he couldn't even watch where he was going. They gave him CPR, but it was hopeless. The poor guy was pronounced dead on the scene. Afterward, lifeguard Bill Bender made a public service announcement warning people that walking and using your phone can be just as dangerous as driving and using a cell phone. 1. Cut off and gone. At the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, Cassandra Stratton moved from Denver to Miami and stayed at a certain condo building that you're probably familiar with. Her husband, Michael Stratton, is a political consultant who's worked on no less than 10 presidential campaigns. As you can imagine, Michael has quite a busy schedule. He travels a lot for work and just so happened to be absent when the condo collapsed in Miami in 2021, killing 99 people, including his wife. But as if this wasn't tragic enough, Michael had been speaking with Cassandra the exact moment the building crumbled in on itself and everyone died. It was about 1:30 in the morning when this horrifyingly destructive incident went down. And rather than sleeping peacefully in her bed, Cassandra was catching up with her husband on the phone. She described to him that the building was shaking violently, and completely without warning, the phone line went dead. Michael didn't understand what was happening until he turned on the news and saw that the very building his wife was in had crumpled to the ground. He hoped against hope that she was still alive, but that didn't turn out to be the case. She died midway through their conversation. with her husband left staring at his cell phone screen. 10. Jamie Osuna. Jamie Osuna was convicted in 2011 for murdering a woman in Bakersfield, California. But just recently, he was found incompetent to stand trial for the ghoulish killing of his cellmate. The ruling came after a pair of psychiatrists determined Jamie didn't understand what was happening and that he couldn't legally be prosecuted. But all of this is really just a big waste of time, as Jamie will eventually be found competent and tried for murder yet again. It doesn't really matter anyway because he is never getting out of jail. He went to prison the first time for torturing and killing a woman named Yvette Pena, earning himself a life sentence. After brutally beheading his cellmate, Luis Romero, at the Corcoran State Prison in 2019, the only thing that might change is the life sentence may get turned into a death sentence. But the thing that should be of most concern to people is the fact that Jamie managed to rip the head off his fellow inmate at all. Like, what the heck? According to the prosecutors, Jamie removed his cellmate's eyeball, ripped off a finger, managed to pull out a piece of the victim's lung, and then severed his head. And the whole time, guards had no idea what was happening and were nowhere to be seen. Obviously, life isn't an episode of Oz. People should not be able to decapitate one another inside a California prison. 9. The Escapist. A criminal with a rather bizarre facial tattoo escaped from a work crew in California and went on a wild rampage. His name is Corey Hughes, 27 years old. He's been described as having a foul mouth, a penchant for crime, and a terrifying tattoo. He tattooed his whole face to make him look like a skeleton. But unfortunately for Corey, whoever tattooed his face didn't do a great job. They didn't even finish the tattoo, so he only kind of looks like a skeleton. It honestly looks like a child's failed attempt at Halloween makeup. People at San Joaquin County were terrified to learn the news that this crazy person had escaped his work detail and was on the loose. He managed to run away, evade authorities by sprinting into the forest, and he probably could have disappeared forever. But he didn't. Instead, he went back to his old neighborhood, where a 65-year-old woman recognized him and called the cops. The cops brought canines and they easily tracked the escapist down. When speaking with a newspaper, the woman who caught the escaped fugitive said she would have thought he'd leave town, especially with a face as remarkable as his. Seriously though, but here's where the case gets really ridiculous. Yes, Corey Hughes technically escaped prison, but he was supposed to be released in February. If he'd only waited another 5 weeks, he would have been out free and clear. Now he's probably going to be in jail for years more than he was supposed to. 8. Dead in the desert. Lauren Show is a perfect example of what can happen when you just wander into California. According to the Southern Californian authorities, unidentified human remains were discovered in the middle of the desert earlier this year in October. After a detailed analysis, the bones proved to be those of Lauren Show. She went missing in June. But wait, what happened to this poor woman? Lauren was a native to New Jersey. On June 28th, she arrived in California to stay with some friends at their house in the Yucca Valley. That's about 30 miles from Palm Springs. One of the friends happened to be Lauren's ex-boyfriend. According to what these friends told police, Lauren got upset and walked away from the house, leaving all her personal belongings behind. And if this sounds suspicious to you, it also sounded suspicious to the police. 3 hours after Lauren had allegedly vanished into the desert, her ex-boyfriend reported her missing. He told the police she was suffering from a mental breakdown. The area was searched high and low by the police and by Lauren's friends, but nobody could find her. All these months later, her remains have finally been uncovered, but the police still don't know the cause of death. They also refuse to speculate as to whether Lauren was murdered or if she simply got lost and swallowed by the desert. 7. The Grim Sleeper. For over 20 years, a serial killer stalked the streets of Los Angeles, leaving stacks of bodies behind him. He became known as the Grim Sleeper, though his real name is Lonnie Franklin. At the time of the killer's reign of terror, it was the 1980s. Los Angeles was in the grip of a cocaine epidemic. The city was also suffering from gang warfare. It was during this upheaval that the police began finding the bodies of women stashed in alleyways. One of these was Deborah Jackson, a mother of 3 who had been shot with a .25 caliber gun. Deborah was only the first to be found. In August of 1986, another woman was found in an alley with the same gunshots from a .25 caliber weapon. She was a 24-year-old mother named Henrietta Wright. At the time, the investigators did not link the various cases. Progress halted, and just like the case of Deborah Jackson, Henrietta's murder went cold. In January of 1987, somebody called the police with an anonymous tip that they had just seen an unknown man dumping a woman's body into an alley. This Good Samaritan remembered the license plate number of the van the guy had been driving and gave it to the police. When the cops arrived, they found the body of 23-year-old Barbara Ware, shot to death with a .25 caliber gun. But they never tracked down the van. These killings went on until 2010. Bodies were discovered one after the other. It wasn't until July of 2010 when Christopher Franklin was arrested on a firearms charge. His DNA was a close match to the DNA found at some of the murders. But he was too young, and so police suspected his father. As it turned out, they were correct. Lonnie Franklin had been killing relentlessly for almost 30 years. They pegged him for 10 murders, but he likely committed way more. 6. The Clever Robber. A man in California has been arrested for robbing the same bank 2 days in a row. Believe it or not, this guy thought he was being clever. In his mind, he believed that if he robbed the bank twice in a row, nobody would expect it. On October 4th, he robbed the Chase Bank in Fountain Valley. The next day, on October 5th, having gotten away with a huge chunk of money the first time, he tried it again. Officers couldn't believe it when they were called back to the same Chase Bank in response to a robbery. But the second time, the criminal didn't get away with it. The police quickly apprehended Samuel Brown and took him to the Orange County Jail. According to the police, this wasn't even his first bank robbery. He had been arrested before for robberies in San Diego. I don't know what it is about California, but it seems to attract bank robbers like flies. 5. Killer Husband. Maya Millette had been missing since January. The mother of 3 was reported as a missing person after her husband said she disappeared from their home in Eastlake, just a few minutes from the border of Mexico. When the police questioned the husband, Larry Millette, he said he had no idea what happened to her. Many of Maya's relatives also said that they never believed Larry could ever hurt his wife, but the police were suspicious. It made no sense for the woman to simply vanish. And so the Chula Vista police chief cracked down hard. His team served over 67 search warrants and conducted nearly 100 interviews. They spent thousands of hours on this investigation, which ultimately resulted in the arrest of the husband. Maya Millette had been a civilian defense contractor for a naval base in San Diego, and although her body has yet to be discovered, the police were still able to piece together the puzzle that named her husband as the killer. You see, Maya had gone to a divorce attorney on January 7th. She had been secretly trying to leave her husband for quite some time. On January 8th, the day after she sought help in filing for divorce, all phone activity stopped and she vanished. 4. Halloween Gone Wrong. Halloween 2021 turned into a deadly night of shootings for California. 1 individual was killed and 3 others were seriously wounded in Gilroy when a Halloween party went horribly wrong. Officers were called to the scene when neighbors began reporting gunshots. There had been a huge outdoor party that devolved into violence, fighting, and ultimately bullets. So far as police could figure it out, there was only one suspect who fired a gun, but he somehow managed to hit 4 people. Either this guy has amazing aim or this was a freak accident. Sadly, the victims were all teenagers between 17 and 19. The shooter himself was only 19, identified as Benjamin Calderon. His house was raided by a SWAT team after the shooting, and Benjamin was taken into custody and charged with homicide. The moral of the story here is that even if you're just trying to do some Halloween partying, if you're doing it in California, there's a pretty good chance you might get shot. 3. CHERILYN HAWKLEY. CHERILYN HAWKLEY was a respected member of her California community back in the 1990s. She was a 5th grade teacher at the Eureka Elementary School in Granite Bay. But on October 29, 1993, CHERILYN was murdered and her body was dumped in a van to be discovered by the police. Believe it or not, this tragic unsolved case is still open today, almost 30 years later. According to investigators' timeline of events, CHERILYN stayed late at the school that day to clean up. A janitor saw her car at 5:30 at night. The next time he looked, around 6 o'clock, she was gone. And from there, nobody saw her for 2 full days until Halloween night. That was when her van was discovered no more than a mile from the school, with her dead body inside. The police determined the cause of death as strangulation. But the question of why has haunted California for decades. Some say it was her ex-husband who did it. Some say the boyfriend she was dating at the time was responsible. And some even say the janitor was involved. Detective Madison is positive whoever killed CHERILYN had known her intimately. Someone targeted this woman, waited for her to be alone, and then struck. But even after all these years of investigating, the case remains unsolved. 2. Los Angeles fireworks fail. Los Angeles is a dangerous place to set off fireworks, but things get even more dangerous when law enforcement officers stick their heads in. Back in June, 16 people were injured while cars and homes were nearly blown to bits in a terrifying fireworks explosion in southern Los Angeles. The explosion happened when police tried to contain 5,000 pounds of confiscated fireworks. In other words, it was entirely the fault of the police. It should come as no surprise then that 10 of the injured people were indeed law enforcement officers. But the rest of the people who got injured were simply minding their own business in their homes when the blast shook the ground. Now, how could the police have possibly done this? According to the Los Angeles Police Department themselves, they were in the process of seizing the illegal fireworks when the explosion happened. It may have been part of a detonation gone wrong. The fireworks were contained inside of a special trailer, though they blew right through the trailer with enough force to rattle the windows of nearby houses. The fireworks were taken from a 24-year-old kid who had them stashed in his house. Unfortunately, police never did fill the public in on what the kid was planning to do with 5,000 pounds of premium fireworks. What do you think he was trying to do? 1. Gender reveal gone wrong. A young couple in California were charged as criminals for their role in a devastating gender reveal party that resulted in a forest fire. All because the couple needed to reveal the gender of their baby in the most dramatic way possible. 23,000 acres of forest were burned down. It happened in El Dorado, with 5 homes being burnt to the ground and 1 firefighter winding up dead. The couple may have gotten away with it if not for the death of the firefighter. That really turned things around. Refugio Manuel Jimenez Jr. and Angela Renee Jimenez are the ones responsible for the fire that claimed the life of Charlie Morton. They have been indicted for over 30 crimes, one of them including involuntary manslaughter. According to the San Bernardino County District Attorney, Jason Anderson, the couple pleaded not guilty and are still waiting for their day in court. But here's what happened that caused the fire in the first place. They used a smoke bomb to reveal the gender of their baby at a time when temperatures in the region were scorching over 20 degrees above normal. This was the hottest year ever, and yet the couple used a pyrotechnic device that started the El Dorado fire. The fire went on burning for the next 23 days.
Number 10. Deadly Bolt Cutters. Tors Reynolds is from Colchester in Essex. She's a body piercer who cut off her own finger on purpose. Wait, what? Yep. To celebrate the 1-year anniversary of cutting off her finger, she turned the severed digit into a DIY pendant and then decorated her stump with a tiny hat. She literally made her severed finger into a necklace. According to her, the necklace looks cute. But let's back things up a bit. She chopped her pinky finger off after one of her friends did the same thing. It's like that old adage, if your friends jumped off a bridge, would you do it too? The answer in her case was yes. She bravely chopped off her own finger, seemingly for no reason. She then stuck the severed piece of her pinky in the freezer, where she forgot about it for nearly a year. The piece of her finger was sitting on a bag of frozen peas. After a year rolled around, she bought herself a glass vial, filled it with a solution of alcohol, and put her pinky finger inside it. She then attached a chain to the lid so that she can wear it around her neck. Apparently, this is the newest and most extreme form of DIY body modification. Forget about getting tattoos and piercings in weird places. People are now chopping off their own fingers and then making them into necklaces. Number 9. Woodworking gone wrong. A mother of 5 had a horrifying woodworking accident that resulted in 2 of her fingers being separated from her hand. Unlike the case we just talked about, Natasha Baggett of Washington, USA, did not cut her fingers off on purpose. It was instead a DIY woodworking accident. Natasha is a devoted member of the Buy Nothing Facebook group. In May of 2019, she was asked if she could make a laptop table for a woman's disabled son who has to stay in a wheelchair. Natasha happily agreed to make the table and began right away. She had just one cut to go when the saw she was using kicked back and sent the piece of wood flying through the air. When the wood came down, it landed on her right hand. The force of the landing pushed her hand directly into the rotating saw, which promptly cut off her index finger completely and most of her middle finger. Her middle finger was only hanging on by a slim piece of bone. Plus, the top part of her thumb was sliced clean off. Panicked and afraid, Natasha tried desperately to grab her phone and dial the police, but she couldn't because her hand was bleeding so badly. It took her 5 minutes just to call herself an ambulance, then 30 more minutes for the ambulance to get there. In the meantime, she tried to squeeze her hand hard enough to stop the bleeding. In the end, Natasha had to get prosthetic fingers and learn how to do everyday tasks again, such as holding her own coffee. Number 8. DIY sex change. The case of Christopher Honeysett is one of absolute horror. Christopher was sent to jail for killing Reverend Ronald Glazebrook. He was found guilty of murder in 2002 after jurors heard about how the 81-year-old man was drowned in his bathtub before his body was cut into pieces and then buried in East Sussex, England. But here's where things get bizarre. The conviction was overturned in 2010 when Christopher alleged that he'd been sexually abused by the Reverend. The jury acquitted the charges and Christopher was allowed to go free. But by this time, Christopher was no longer Christopher. He had given himself a DIY transgender operation in which he chopped off his own body parts to turn himself into a girl named Crystal. Christopher went into jail and Crystal came out. 4 months after her release, she was caught killing a man named Peter Brick, who was wrongly accused of being a pedophile. The biggest issue here is that Crystal Honeysett was released from prison with no supervision. She drowned and dismembered an elderly vicar and then was allowed to walk free. With just 4 months of freedom, Crystal tracked down Peter Brick based on unfounded rumors that he was a pedophile and beat him over the head with a hammer. until he was dead. Crystal has now been given a life sentence, and considering her track record, she probably won't be getting out of jail ever again. Number 7. A nasty infection. A teen girl in Brazil died from a fatal infection in her eye. Her name was Isabela Eduarda de Sousa, just 15 years old. With the help of her friend, she tried to give herself a DIY eyebrow piercing. She had begged her mother to take her to get a piercing done professionally, but her mother refused. Other members of her family also advised her against getting the piercing. But as a 15-year-old girl, Isabella didn't really care what her parents said. So she got together with a friend to do it herself. 3 days after the DIY operation, she began to develop swelling on her face. The swelling became so bad that she was rushed to the hospital. Once she got to the hospital, she suffered a heart attack and had to be put on a ventilator. But by this time, the infection from the needle passing through her flesh had already spread throughout her body. There was nothing doctors could do to save her. Isabella's family is now mourning the death of their daughter, all because she wanted her eyebrows pierced, regardless of the consequences. Number 6. Makeshift condom. If you're going to do some adult activities with your partner, it's never a bad idea to use a condom. But one man took things a little too far when he tried to make his very own. Instead of using the little sleeve of latex that is available pretty much everywhere in the world, he tried a high-powered epoxy resin. I guess his reasoning here was that if he couldn't get his hands on a condom right away, he would simply seal the exit with what was basically superglue to prevent his girlfriend from getting pregnant. This was a pretty immediate failure. He suffered catastrophic organ failure and died right away. According to the Toronto Sun, investigators say the man mixed the epoxy with a whitener and inhaled it before the act itself to get a bit of a buzz. The medical examiners never did say how exactly the epoxy caused the organ failure, or if it was only one part of a bigger problem. Either way, he was found the day after the incident, dumped in some shrubs near the hotel where he was with his girlfriend. She had just ditched him, the epoxy still hard as cement over his private parts. Would you ever do something so reckless just because you couldn't be bothered to run to the store and get real protection? Let us know your thoughts on this case in the comments below. And if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 5. DIY Russian exorcisms. The Russian Orthodox Church has made a very strange public warning. They have advised people against doing their own DIY exorcisms. You may laugh at this, thinking that you would need to be completely crazy to perform your own exorcism. But the truth is that things are different in Russia, especially rural Russia. DIY exorcisms have caused a brutal string of deaths and injuries. Following these terrifying deaths, Bishop Hilarion began to draw up a set of regulations on the proper way to expel demons. Because, yes, there's obviously a right way to do an exorcism. The bishop says there needs to be a unifying set of rules on how to perform these types of ceremonies so that people don't get hurt. In 2019, 2 Russians were killed when their families believed they had been possessed by evil spirits. Their family members butchered them by accident while performing dangerous DIY exorcisms. One of these victims was a 9-year-old boy. He was whipped and gagged by his father as his father tried desperately to cast the demon out of his body. After the exorcism gone wrong, the father, as well as the local leader of the church, who also participated in the exorcism, were charged with murder. To make matters even worse for the people, they spent 2 days trying to resurrect the boy before resorting to burying his body in a park. The point I'm trying to make here, and also that Bishop Hilarion is trying to make, is that people should stop trying to perform their own exorcisms. Back in 2011, there was a woman who died in Voronezh after her parents forced her to guzzle 5 liters of holy water. They did this so that she would not be in love with her husband anymore, who they thought was the literal devil. Number 4. DIY helicopter. An innovative young man in India built himself a helicopter from scratch. His name was Ibrahim, a high school dropout. But just because he dropped out of school didn't mean that he wasn't as smart as his fellow students. Maybe he was just bored. In any case, using nothing except videos from YouTube, he put together a helicopter with a Maruti 800 engine, with the body built from steel and aluminum pipes. But here's where the DIY project went terribly wrong. On a warm night in August, when the 24-year-old was ready to finally fly his makeshift helicopter, he was killed. His friends had gathered around to witness the first flight of the helicopter. Everyone in the village was extremely proud of Ibrahim, and things were looking up. He started the engine, the rotors began spinning, and then the blades from the tail rotor snapped. A piece of the blade hit Ibrahim at extremely high speed, slicing his neck open as if someone snuck up behind him with a scalpel. Even though the villagers did manage to get him to the hospital, there was nothing that could be done. He bled to death before the doctors even had a chance to look at him. Number 3. One dead biohacker. The CEO of a biomedical startup company had a bit of a herpes problem. It's not that shocking. Somewhere around a quarter of the people in the US suffer from this unfortunate virus. There's no cure. There are only a few mildly effective treatments, and yet it is everywhere. CEO Aaron Trewick thought that he had biohacked his very own treatment that would be a world's first cure. He got himself a live audience in February and injected himself with the untested treatment to try and cure his herpes. It was one of the most recent DIY medical experiments that are becoming more and more popular. As gene therapy becomes widely available, people, especially smart people with lots of money and access to a lab, are able to create their own DIY vaccines and experiment on themselves. Unfortunately, we will probably never know if this DIY treatment worked. Aaron Trewick was discovered dead in a flotation tank. Flotation tanks are soundproof pods filled with salt water to give the user a sensory deprivation experience. However, Aaron's sensory deprivation went a little overboard because he died inside the tank, depriving himself from ever sensing anything again. We don't know if this had anything to do with the makeshift vaccine, but either way, Aaron is dead. Number 2. Impaled in the leg. A man was left with 2 rusty nails and a 4-foot-long post of wood impaled through his leg after a freaky DIY accident. His name is Jordan Shepard, and he claims that he felt no pain, even though it took 4 firefighters to saw through the stake sticking out of his leg so that he could be taken to the hospital. Jordan was taken down a shed with his partner Nicole to get ready for a bonfire party night. As he was disassembling the shed, a DIY demolition project that probably would have been better suited to a professional crew, he made a mistake. He hit the shed too hard, and a piece came spinning out and stuck into his leg. Jordan had to call for an ambulance, but because these are pandemic times, the ambulance could have taken up to 6 hours to get to him. His only option was to have firefighters saw through the piece of wood so that his girlfriend could drive him to the hospital. Doctors at the hospital then had to remove the nails from his leg, followed by some tetanus shots to make sure he didn't get infected. 3 bones in his foot were broken from the tumble he took, and he'll have a mean scar on his leg for the rest of his life. Number 1. Burned for YouTube. You might be familiar with TV personality AJ Pritchard. If not, you may be familiar with his girlfriend Abby Quinnen. Abby is a professional dancer and something of an internet personality. She was trying to follow the steps in a DIY YouTube tutorial when she set herself on fire and just about burned to death. Abby was only 23 years old at the time of the incident. She was trying to cut a wine bottle in half using fire when the glass bottle exploded and she was engulfed in flames. All the hair on her head was burned off. She needed 3 skin grafts, and she got stuck in the hospital for 7 weeks. Almost all of her body was covered in bandages from 3rd-degree burns. But here's a bit more about the stunt itself. It involves dipping a rope in a flammable substance, wrapping it around a wine bottle, and then lighting the rope on fire. The flaming rope is supposed to cut the wine bottle in half perfectly, But in Abby's case, the bottle shattered and she was lit on fire. What's the worst you ever hurt yourself in a DIY gone wrong? Let us know in the comments, and don't be embarrassed. Thanks a lot for watching, and be sure to hit that subscribe button for more great videos. See you next time. Bye!